Well, good morning, everyone, and I guess I should say good afternoon and good evening, because I know we have people joining us from all over the world. My name is Grameen Foundation. I'm the Director of Annual Giving here at Grameen Foundation, and we are really excited to be doing our first donor chat with Alex today. And as you see him on the other screen, I'm here in Seattle, and Alex is there in our DC office. So good morning and welcome, Alex.
Good morning.
And so, as people may recall, at the end of every year we try to get donors together and do some sort of conversation with Alex. Often it's a year review or perhaps some sort of presentation on a current poverty fighting topic, and take some questions at the end. And it's often formal and has slides, but this year we're trying for something just a little bit different. We've heard from a lot of donors that they just want a chance to have a conversation with Grameen Foundation, do something a little less formal. And of course, Alex is up for that, and we love the chance to just talk to our donors and hear what's on your mind. And so that's what we're trying this year. It will be, like I said, less formal, a little different. We don't know what's coming. This whole conversation will be directed by you, our donors and supporters. So welcome to all of you, donors. We have Bankers Without Borders volunteers. We also have opportunity makers, and we just have supporters in general. So this conversation will be all your questions, so start thinking of them now. And as we thought about this conversation you're going to have with Alex, we thought, why have one of our staff members host this? If it's going to be about donors, why don't we have a donor host the conversation? And so at this time, I'm going to pull one of our donors in on the screen. I'd like to introduce you to Jamie Prins. Jamie is a donor of Grameen Foundation, a volunteer, a great poverty fighter and committed to this cause, and was kind enough to join us today. So thank you for coming, Jamie. We're really excited to have you here. And how it's going to work is Jamie's going to kick off the conversation with a couple of questions of her own for Alex, and that kind of helps break the ice and hopefully get the ideas rolling. And then she's going to start calling on people from the audience. So just a couple of logistical items. Obviously, the first question to ask is, how do I ask a question? You'll notice on the right side of your screen, in the webinar software, there's a place where you can type in questions, and we encourage you to start doing that even right now. And we'll be working our way through those questions. And also as an option, you can see that you can figuratively raise your hand to ask a question. And we'll be watching those and calling on some people live to talk with Alex and working our way through all of these questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie and Alex and all of you, and I look forward to seeing where this conversation takes us.
Thank you. Hi everyone, hi Alex, nice to finally meet you, heard so much about you, and thanks everyone for joining today's webcast. A little bit about myself before we get started. So I'm a wife and a mom of a 7-week-old baby at home, so just kind of excited to leave the house for the first time in a little bit. And also for work, I actually run marketing for Amazon Kindle's education team, and I've been interested in Grameen for a long time. Basically started as I studied economics in school, which led to an interest in microfinance, which then led to an interest in Grameen. I've been following the organization's history for a while, and so that's kind of where my background comes in terms of why I started supporting. So to get everything started, what I was going to do is ask Alex 2 questions, and then I'll take questions from anyone else online or over voice. So the first question I was going to ask, I know everyone here is already familiar with Grameen. However, I'd like to hear, Alex, from you, if you could describe as the founder, how does Grameen Foundation help people in your own words?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jamie, for playing this role today on behalf of our community of friends and donors and volunteers and facilitating the conversation. When I woke up this morning, my wife told me the federal government was closed, but I knew that there was nothing going to stop me from making my way into our office here in DC. because I was so eager to thank our community of donors and volunteers and also share what I'm excited about what's going on in our organization. And our strategy has evolved over our 16 years, certainly. Right now, we work fundamentally through partners and directly with the poor in three basic areas. First is we recognize that, have long recognized what a lot of the researchers tell us, which is that access to affordable and reliable financial services is even more important to the poor as it is to the non-poor. Think about how important it is to you to be able to borrow for your car, or for your home, or for education, or to transfer some money through a check, or insurance, or save money when you have excess. So those services, the researchers tell us, are more important to the poor, and we've been working for many years and continue to, in a very serious and urgent way, to make sure more and more reliable and more affordable financial services are available to the poor, especially the poorest. The second thing that we've been working on for a while is how do you harness this information technology revolution that has changed many of our lives significantly, put that to work for the poor, especially for the financial services available to them, but also healthcare services and agricultural extension. And we find that when you work in those domains with a technology orientation, they often reinforce each other in very important ways. By providing agricultural extension and financial services to a subsistence farmer in Africa, you can achieve much more progress than just doing one of those. Third, we've developed a kind of a suite of tools, largely technology-driven, that are meant to enhance the performance of poverty-fighting organizations around the world, to allow them to measure how effective they're doing, not just to keep a scorecard, though that's important, but also to be able to actually, through measurement, improve at every iteration. You see oftentimes products coming on the market that you may purchase that seem to be, significantly better than what was there 2 or 3 years ago. But we want to make sure that level of continuous improvement of products is available to the poor also. And we do that through the thousands of organizations around the world that are set up to fight poverty. We end up being their strategic partner. So, in a nutshell, that's what we're doing at this point in our history. We're extremely excited about the progress we've achieved in the last year and what we're looking for into next year.
Oh, sorry, looks like I was muted. I'm going to try one more time. Thanks, Alex. Your response? My second question actually is, there are a lot of charities and organizations out there serving the poor internationally, and so I was wondering, what makes the Grameen Foundation unique?
First of all, we're not completely unique. I wouldn't say that. I would also say that there are a tremendous number of effective humanitarian organizations around the world. My wife and I support several of them, and so I know I'm saying we're absolutely unique. But there are reasons why I've chosen to be associated professionally with Grameen Foundation since it started, and why I think we do have many unique qualities. First is, I think, if you think about our philosophy and our brand, Grameen Foundation is rooted in the work of the Grameen Bank and the Grameen family of companies in Bangladesh, which is really one of the most robust laboratories for developing high-impact poverty reduction strategies that have ever existed in history. And so we've been in a very unique position of building on those to try to bring those ideas to a global scale throughout our history. And that's a key kind of R&D hub that we have, and that's where a lot of our innovations come from, rather than from a kind of a conference room in a university or even in our offices here. They're really grounded in a field of reality with. And then secondly, Grameen, conceptually or philosophically, we've always believed that it's better to approach poverty from building on the strengths of the poor and the often underappreciated assets of poor people, rather than their deficiencies. In fact, researchers now tell us that in certain areas, the poor are much more able and have much higher developed skills in terms of overcoming their poverty than other people, because they, for a variety of reasons that I can get into. So we've always put that strengths-based approach to the poor that I think is a differentiator. Now, secondly, I mentioned a minute ago, technology. We've been, many organizations are now trying to harness information technology to benefit the poor. The fact that there's 6 billion cell phones around the world, so that even people with very modest means can afford them. We've actually been working in information technology for poverty reduction since 2001, long before we knew how much this would be proliferated over the last decade. And we've learned a lot of things in that period, one of which is that technology alone is rarely a solution, especially for the poor and poorest. That enabling human networks, such as microfinance loan officers or government nurses or farmers themselves in their communities, to actually be the champion of that technology and making it really work over the last mile, that's hugely important. I think we've seen that, and we've been able to define several domains in technology that, again, there are a number of organizations that work in one of these, but we work in all three: financial services, health, and agriculture. Another differentiator, I think, is our commitment to measurement. You know, a lot of work in the charitable and nonprofit area has been based for too long in anecdotes and stories. And stories are very powerful. They touch the heart, they tickle the mind, they give you a sense of what's possible. But grounding what we do in hard data, I think, is as, if not more important. And we've been a leader in trying to make sure that research and hard data about what's working for the poor ground what we do in our efforts. We developed something called the Progress Out of Poverty Index that is a leading measurement tool for poverty reduction. We've developed something else called the TerraWorks, which helps make, among other things, makes that index, the information it generates more valuable for the poor. And we've long also engaged in some and leveraged kind of hard research, socioeconomic research on what works. So we try to make sure, because we have limited resources, that whatever we do is the best possible, and again, using hard data to ground those decisions. Lastly, while we have about 200 professionals around the world working for us and many people working for our partner organizations, we think that poverty reduction should be grounded in and engage civil society broadly. And that's why we created a 16,000 person database of volunteers, and many of you may be in that database. We've been going at this in this way for 5 years, so that we can get the most possible people with the most diverse skills and language abilities involved in poverty fighting, not just by simply writing a check, however valuable that is, but also by contributing their time, whether it's from their desk at home or at work, or by taking a field assignment for a number of days or weeks. And we've actually, through Bankers Without Borders, had more than 1,000 assignments completed to date, many of them involving multiple volunteers, where they'll strategically go in and assist a poverty-fighting organization like us or our partners to help them break through to a new level of effectiveness. So those are some of the distinguishing characteristics that I think people should be aware of.
Okay, I'm unmuted, so I will restart. Basically, just want to say thanks to those responses. And I know for me personally, just, you know, the leveraging of technology and the measurement aspect has been super interesting. And it's a story you don't really hear a lot, so thanks again for going over that. So I want to make sure that we leave tons of time for the donors who joined us today. And so basically, as a reminder, there are 2 ways you can ask Alex questions. Alex, thanks again for being so accessible and letting us ask you these questions today. The first way is you can just type in the chat window, and we'll be picking up the questions, and I'll just be reading them aloud. But if you want to actually be brave and talk on the line, you can also figuratively raise your hand in the chat, and you can also call on me and you can ask your question. And then for those of you who actually do speak and do your question voice-wise, I'll also ask you to kind of give us a sense of why you support Grameen as well. So that will be kind of an extra for those who are brave enough to speak live as well. So to get started, thanks everyone. We're getting some really great questions. The first one is a question from Thomas. Oh, actually, we just want to say hi to some folks on the call to get started. So hello to Thomas from Hawaii and Nancy from Kenya and others who have joined us. Our first question is actually going to be from Dana, and the question was, can you tell us more about how Grameen Foundation uses technology specifically to fight poverty? So Alex, I know you mentioned that already. Can you elaborate more on how technology is used?
Sure. First of all, going back to experience in Bangladesh, and thanks very much for the question. Professor Yunus, around the time we were setting up Grameen Foundation, felt that information technology could be a huge accelerator for poverty reduction. And so it was that when many of the initial experiments taking place in Bangladesh were started, we were created. So it was, we were immediately curious about that. And I think that if I were to boil it down to a couple of things, that many times in trying to fight poverty, organizations or people that are trying to collaborate and sometimes it's as simple as where to meet or how to send money or how to kind of collaborate in a certain way. The inability to communicate quickly and reliably stymies a lot of efforts, and you see this most specifically in natural disasters. Where the inability to communicate one to the next, and we certainly saw this in the Philippines, where the breakdown of communication made relief much more difficult, but where they could maintain and get the communication channels, the cellular communication channels up, it facilitated that process. But even in the long-term development, so communication is extremely important to poverty fighters and to the poor. And then the second thing is that there's a huge amount of information available for how people can take charge of their health, how people can apply what's been discovered in the laboratory about what makes farming more productive for subsistence farmers. But that information seems to never quite get to in a usable form to poor people. And especially, it doesn't always get to the rest of us, but especially to the poor. So information that can make them more productive, healthier, and which will help them in their own fight against poverty doesn't arrive. But technology can break down those barriers and get that information right to their doorstep in a language and that they understand. And beyond that, technology has a huge ability to increase the efficiency and security of microfinance, which is a well-known strategy for enabling the poor to build businesses, to build assets, to educate their children, to take care of their health care. Money is often the critical factor there, but if you can transfer money electronically, over a cell phone rather than in cash, which can get stolen or lost, or in any case needs to be hand delivered, that can bring huge efficiencies to the microfinance work that we've been doing for so long. And again, we're seeing progress in all of these areas. Grameen Foundation is really at the center of those applications of technology, but we're only feeling we're scratching the surface of what's possible. Especially in the domains of financial services for the poor, healthcare for the poor, and agricultural extension and support for poor farmers around the world.
We're getting the hang of this. I'm unmuted, so I'm going to ask this question next. So, thank you, Duke in California. We have your question, and Alex's question is, what's the progress in Haiti since the earthquake?
Thanks for asking that question. The Haiti earthquake was obviously devastating. I went there just a few weeks after the earthquake took place. Grameen Foundation is a partner, Fonds Jose, which by number of clients is the largest microfinance organization in Haiti, which also provides many services, especially related to healthcare for the poor and for their poor clients. I'm also involved in my personal capacity in a governance role with Fonds Jose, and I was just there a few weeks ago. And I would say that, first of all, the organizations that just survived the earthquake and people was quite an accomplishment. And while there was many organizations that people that perished, many more survived. But what we saw was that the most innovative organizations like Fonds Jose used the outpouring of international aid in very creative ways that didn't just kind of meet the immediate consumption needs of the poor, but actually built their capabilities to kind of long-term rebuild their assets and in fact emerge stronger than before the earthquake. And so we're in pockets where that has taken place, where people use that aid in some kind of creative, forward-looking ways. And I'd say Fonds Jose, our partner Fonds Jose, has really done that. Fonds Jose has also gotten involved in using technology for poverty measurement and for mobile banking, which is what I was just speaking about, using the phone as a way to transfer money rather than through physical cash, working with the provider Digicel there, which is the largest mobile provider. I'd say that 2012 was a year where the rebuilding effort by the government of the basic infrastructure in the earthquake-affected areas, especially Port-au-Prince, finally started to kind of get some momentum. And that continued into 2013, but 2013 was also a year of a lot of growing political instability in the country, which I think slowed down progress, at least that was driven by the government. And that, unfortunately, that political instability is probably likely to grow in the months ahead. But the civil society organizations, at least the best of them, have really helped, plus some long kind of infrastructure projects that began long before the earthquake and weren't really taken off course by them. There have been some noticeable improvements in the country and in the capital. Some new factories have been set up in the north. So I'd say that overall, there are a lot of underreported success stories. And again, Grameen Foundation, for our partner Fonds Jose, we feel like we've been a part of some of those. But the challenges remain very real in Haiti. Fortunately, this year there were no major storms and hurricanes of any kind that set back the country, and so that was certainly a help.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Judy, for the question. Our next question comes from Villette. Do you think the concept of microfinance is changing?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for the question, and again, thanks to all of you taking part in this. Microfinance is certainly changing in many ways. In fact, it's been continuously changing since the modern microfinance movement was launched in the mid-70s in Bangladesh. Some trace it back to the 60s in Latin America. And the performance standards, the methods, the best practices, all those things continue to change. But one of the things that's happened, two of the things that's happened recently, and I could probably name others, are people have been thinking, how can we use information technology as a way to get some significant efficiency gains in microfinance, and probably it's fair to say that still remains more aspirational than real. But we feel some of the things we're doing, especially in Uganda and India and the Philippines, are at the cutting edge of that idea. The second thing is I think people are realizing that there are a whole variety of organizations, some of which go back decades, even centuries, that can be effective providers of microfinance. So let me give you an example. In Latin America, microfinance organizations, which we've worked with quite a few, have tended to thrive more in the urban areas. And for many years, we tried to entice them to go into the rural areas. And And frankly, they weren't that interested. They were very good at one thing. So we began to think about who could, or maybe who already is providing financial services to poor farmers, subsistence farmers in Latin America, and cooperatives that have been functioning for decades. Many of them not that effectively, but there were kind of a cream of the crop of the cooperatives that were able to do that. And so we thought we could, by partnering with the Fair Trade International, we could identify the high-performing cooperatives. And one of the things we saw they were needed was some long-term finance. I met many coffee farmers when I was in Latin America last year who said that if they could just get money to replant their coffee plants, but they could have 3 or 4 years to repay the loan, they could increase production significantly and their incomes. But no one was giving them that kind. Their cooperatives didn't have that amount of money on those terms to provide them those loans. So we started something called the Fair Trade Access Fund, which we hoped would initially be capitalized by this point by about $8 to $10 million in people who were willing to invest money but expect a modest return, but really was more for the social impact. And I'm pleased to say that just a little more than a year after it's been launched, we have $28 million in commitments for that fund that are, that through a partnership with 2 other organizations, is now making loans to these microfinance organizations, that I'll call them, that are doing the work and filling in the gaps that traditional microfinance institutions have not been doing. So there are many other changes, some of them more dramatic than others. There's a new type of microfinance that we're getting involved in called Village Savings and Loan Associations, which are kind of a scaled back, no-frills microfinance that really is largely managed by the village community, not by professional loan officers. And, we've been supporting that through some of our technology initiatives in East Africa. So there's more of a diversity of providers and a knowledge that, again, to fill in the gaps and to drive more efficiency gains, we're going to need to think differently about microfinance than we did when we were just trying to scale a few basic models, which, again, if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't even be at this point. But now we're needing to kind of turn some of our thinking on its head.
Thanks, Alex. For our next question, we're going to talk to Magdalena. What would you say is your most successful initiative to date, and how do you measure success?
Great. I think the success that I'm most proud of, and I think that is in fact something that we're winding up next year, is something called the Growth Guarantees Program. This is a program whereby people didn't contribute money, but actually pledged to provide a guarantee, which was pooled with other people's guarantees, and ultimately was launched with $31 million in 2005. And this facility basically allowed us to go around and encourage banks, local banks, to lend in a wholesale manner to leading microfinance institutions, and it helped generate local currency loans that would allow microfinance organizations to grow and meet the need. There have been many, up to that point, there are many loan guarantee initiatives in microfinance that mostly had underperformed. I was worried at the time whether ours would be added to that list. But we've actually used that money to leverage more than $250 million of loans to leading microfinance organizations. But even more impressively, in the countries we've done it, we've started a kind of a revolution of banks willing to be making those loans even without guarantees from us or from anyone. So that was where not only did we make it possible for individual organizations to grow, but we changed the way the industry thought of financing itself. And it had much larger consequences than even that $250 million, you know, which sounds to me like a lot of money, but influenced many more, much more in terms of resources than that. So, but they're quite, I could pick from a number of those. How we measure success, I say, is really in 2 fundamental ways. Number one, are people getting out of poverty? And this is where we've developed this tool with the Ford Foundation and the World Bank called the Progress Out of Poverty Index, based on a prototype that was developed in Bangladesh. And it allows poverty-fighting organizations, with a very simple, low-cost way, to generate data about whether over time their people they're affecting are getting out of poverty. And so we can say, it doesn't describe which different causes of that are paramount compared to others. That requires a deeper level of research. But it does let you know whether people, from one year to the next, where they are in the poverty spectrum. And so in our various agriculture programs, now with our health programs, microfinance programs, we can tell you how effective we're being, not just in taking some perhaps unrepresentative story. And so just to give you one example, in an organization we're working with in India providing microfinance for years, we presented to our board a few weeks ago that of the people in poverty, a certain kind of demographic of poverty served by this organization, within 2 years, the number in that extreme poverty group went from 40% to 31%. So that was almost cut by a quarter. And that was much faster than poverty was being reduced in the general population. So, but also, alongside that, again, we try to ground it in really the ultimate objective, which are we closer to a poverty-free world. We also try to look at our tools and methods and innovations being adopted by the wider community. Many of you know this concept of the tipping point. And we see that if simply we develop an innovation and kind of hold it close to ourselves and don't try to make it available to other poverty-fighting organizations whose collective budgets and reach are much larger than ours, we're doing a disservice. And so we look to see, are we setting an example that others are following? And when we see that happening, then we also know we're being effective. And I think those are the two fundamental measurement ways that we look at our effectiveness across all of our programs. Not all of them are being equally effective at any time. That's certainly true. And we often publish lessons learned papers about all the many mistakes we've made, which is our MOTEC program in Ghana has published long papers the last 2 years on that. And we're going to be doing that across our organization. So sharing our learnings, including our mistakes, is an important part of the process also.
Thanks, Alex. Everyone, thanks for the great questions. Keep them coming. We're seeing some really good ones, so we're going to keep on going. Our next question is from Barbara in Ohio. She asks, can you tell us about Bankers Without Borders and where these volunteers serve?
And where what?
Where these volunteers serve.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you, Barbara, for the question. I'm wondering perhaps if you're a Bankers Without Borders volunteer interested in getting involved, but in any case, I appreciate the question. This is really one of the, as I said earlier, one of the differentiating parts of our organization. Most humanitarian organizations that rely on volunteers as much as we do, it's because they have tiny budgets and they can't afford to pay any professionals. And yet, even as we've grown and become some generous support from people like you and large foundations like the Gates Foundation, we've kind of doubled down on our commitment to volunteers. Bankers Without Borders volunteers are currently in 36 countries around the world, and you can see that on the Bankers Without Borders database. But I think it's important to know that Bankers Without Borders volunteers often can serve some poverty-fighting project or goal or initiative, simply from sitting in their homes or their workplaces with a computer and a telephone and their wits. But oftentimes it does also require some sort of interface, whether virtually or in person, with poverty-fighting organizations on the ground. And it's just based on the specifications of an individual assignment, whether travel is required. But again, we have more opportunities to serve hopping onto this platform all the time, and I should mention that there are many other organizations that are looking to manage volunteers, and we've developed a database and an approach to doing this that we feel is very strong, and we're increasingly selling that service, selling to other organizations, whether they're corporations wanting to create volunteer opportunities for their employees, or nonprofits wishing to kind of use their volunteers in a more efficient way, that we've been having others come onto our platform and use that to avoid the reinvention of the wheel. And so that's been an exciting development for this year. But again, Bankers Without Borders, whether it's the countries that projects have been undertaken in, or the much larger number of countries where we have volunteers registered in our databases, it's truly a global effort.
Great, thanks, and thanks again for the question. Our next question actually comes from Ramana in Delhi. She asks, can you tell me about one of the projects you have in India?
Sure. Well, India has long been one of the countries that we've had our biggest and most successful programs. We in fact have two sister organizations there, one called Grameen Foundation India, based in the suburbs of Delhi, led by Chamni Ori, and an Indian woman who worked for us in the US for many years and then moved back to her native India to lead a small team in Delhi. And then second of all, we have something called Grameen Capital India, which is a joint venture and a kind of an investment bank, boutique investment bank connecting the capital markets of India with poverty-fighting organizations that are operating in a business-like way and responsibly take on, whether it's debt or equity, to expand their innovations. So we have, and that's based in Bombay. I think the thing that is most exciting about India, we've just come to the conclusion of a major effort to expand access to micro savings in India through one of the most respected organizations called Cashcore, Credit and Savings for the Hardcore Poor, based in eastern Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the poorest areas in India. And so Indian law prevents organizations like Cashcore from collecting savings, but there's a loophole, whereas if you can use technology and leverage and have the microfinance organization working in concert with a licensed bank, that you can do it. We were one of the first to take advantage of this loophole and allow thousands of Cashcore clients to open up savings accounts for the first time and to deposit money electronically into those accounts and to then access them however they pleased. We're now looking to build on that experience and elsewhere in India, now that we've kind of declared mission accomplished there. And we're launching, as one of the follow-ons to that, something called the Mobile Financial Services Incubator, which is meant to develop at a country level what are the most powerful ways to use mobile financial services for the benefit of the poor and the organizations that serve them. We piloted this incubator approach with the support of the Gates Foundation in Uganda, and now we're taking it to Kenya and India. I'm very excited about that. It's just getting going now. We are also taking a big success story in mobile health, using the mobile phone to let people take charge of their health. And we've taken that model from Ghana and have brought it to some of the poorest states in India through an initiative called MOTEC, Mobile Technology for Community Health. And that's working in a couple of different ways, but I think the most easy to grasp is using the phone as a way to create a database of people that are battling HIV and AIDS, and in that way to keep better track of that epidemic, to help slow it, but also to give on people's cell phones reminders about when to take their medication that can keep their HIV under control. And you'll find that actually the people that are compliant with taking their medications, both rich and poor, educated and uneducated, is about the same the world over. But there are certain things that can be done, particularly through the field of behavioral economics, we know, that make it much more likely that people are more compliant and use existing medications to their best advantage. So those are areas now. With regard to Grameen Capital India, this joint venture that we started with a couple of Indian banks, they are launching a new financing initiative that we are strongly backing, which should allow for a significant increase in the amount of loan funds available to social enterprises, including microfinance organizations, a certain type of finance that, again, long-term credit, essentially, that is available in the marketplace now, and we'll be working with them to kind of, we put the foundation in place for that fund, or what is technically called a debt vehicle, and then we'll be working with Grameen Capital India to bring in a lot of money. And one of the big sources of financing throughout for Grameen Capital India has been wealthy people and financial institutions within India. We provided a little, about $500,000 of our own money, and virtually everything else has come from within India. It's about $150 million and counting in resources that Grameen Capital India has brought to the poverty reduction effort from that little amount that we put in about 7 or 8 years ago.
Great, thanks, Alex. Our next question comes from Dana. So I know earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that a lot of the things that Grameen does getting information to the fore. So her question is, how do you help people who are illiterate understand information about farming, for example?
Sure, well, that's a great question. And, one of the things I most appreciate about our donors and volunteers in general are how educated they are about poverty fighting. I talked to a woman yesterday on the West Coast who was telling me that she reads every last thing that we send her about what we do at Grameen Foundation, which certainly makes the people who work here, who compose those articles, feel very good. At the same time, I want to welcome anyone at any level of knowledge to ask any question, however basic. But first of all, the literacy question is real. There are lots of emerging technologies and strategies for example, using images where text would have been used before. So a case where someone could take a picture of a crop that seems diseased, email it to, or send it, through text message to an expert, and then have the expert, if necessary, call them back with a recommendation, a diagnosis. And so there are ways that there are also speech recognition technologies in more and more languages where people can speak a question and it can be translated virtually and sent to an expert and sent back. But the way we've gotten around that most practically in Uganda, where we've done the most agricultural extension, is we ask for farmers in an area, and we've had an online database that you could access through a very simple cell phone to anyone in Uganda to access for a long time. But we felt that the uptake of that, largely for literacy reasons, was not that great. So we said about a third of the different villages in Uganda so far, we said maybe even more, approaching half, some farmer among you who can read at least at like an 8th or 9th grade level one of two languages, the dominant language of Uganda or English. And if you can do that, if you can find such a person, we'll give them a loan to buy a smartphone, not quite the ones like we have here, but $90 Android phone. And we'll install an application, and then there's a kind of a back office call center where the application can't go or doesn't have useful information. And that person is kind of the translator of taking all the information embedded in this app, thousands of different tips for farmers to get better use out of their farms, get a better price for their crops, more productivity, and so on. And his job, or her job, and there are about 1,000 of these community knowledge workers there, is to find out what the questions they're asking, and know enough about the application and be literate enough to find the answer to the question and deliver that information just in time to the farmers so that they can actually get a better result. And then where they can't find the answer, then there's a small call center of agricultural experts that they can talk to. And at that point, literacy isn't a problem anymore. But we're finding that actually training that one farmer who's at least semi-literate means that most of the time they're able to get the answers they need from their $90 phone and this application installed, and don't even need to go to the call center, which then helps keeps our costs under control. And it's remarkable how much information that could be useful to poor people in their capacity as farmers, say, that never gets to them because we're doing the agricultural extension in a kind of 19th or 20th century way. And Grameen Foundation is at the forefront, especially in Uganda, of providing it in a 21st century way, which is much more efficient. But again, it's not only technology, it's that human element. And again, you finding that one farmer who's motivated to help all the farmers in their community and has, again, an 8th or 9th grade education, which we find is present in most society, most communities, at least in Uganda.
Thanks a lot. It's helpful to understand that that person in the community helps serve in that role. Our next question comes from Kita. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She asks, can you tell us more about your micro savings initiative and how it leverages technology?
Sure, I'd be happy to. One of the things, Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, which I kind of started with that, has long realized that micro credit, complemented by micro savings and micro insurance as well, is much more powerful than any one of those operating alone. And just simply put, if you're taking a loan for a micro business, to have a safe place to put away money where your business is thriving will help make sure you have a liquid asset when your business is not doing so well, or when your family has a health crisis. And then insurance further gives you more options and makes you more resilient. But many microfinance organizations around the world, in an attempt to simplify the model and get large numbers quickly, kind of abandoned micro savings and micro insurance and focused only on microcredit. Sometimes local laws concerning banking were also part of the reason that they focused so much on credit. So we've now been trying to. We worked with three kind of leading organizations, one in India, one in the Philippines, and one in Ethiopia, that were very good at microcredit, and we worked for 4 years with them to add micro savings, and that kind of required a real culture change and systems change. It wasn't simply like flipping on a switch. Maybe you could think of it as someone who's all their lives been very dominant right-handed and hardly used their left hand for anything, and now you wanted to train them to be ambidextrous, to use both hands equally. And it was hard, but it's possible. In that same way, we were trying to have these organizations become more holistic providers of financial services. And I would say that adopting technology to both track all these savings, 2 pesos, 3 pesos given by a woman, make sure it gets credited in her own account, not someone else's account. Interest calculations on those, making sure you're reporting to the central bank, because the central bank has a strong interest in making sure that organizations stay solvent if they're holding on to a lot of savings of the public, especially the poor. And I think that it's fair to say that 2 of the 3 organizations we work with, the one in India, Cash Forward, the one in the Philippines, Card, we're able to, with our assistance and with some of our bankers that board as volunteers and our staff and our consultants and financing that we have at the Gates Foundation, really to crack that technology nut that allowed them to break through and become really full service. And that's both the back-end technology to track all the money, but increasingly, especially in the Philippines and India, it allowed them to also accept the money and transfer the money electronically and kind of work cash out of the system, which has a lot of advantages, especially for the poor and organizations trying to serve the poor in remote locations. In Ethiopia, we had some modest success, I would say. but they struggled with the technology to kind of have more than a modest uptake increase in micro savings, and so we would put that more as a kind of lesser success, and it was based on on really their adoption of the technology and probably our ability to convince them and to help solve their technology problems. So I think we were much more successful in India and the Philippines than in Ethiopia. But again, this is where technology is essential, but in order to make technology work in an organization, there's a huge kind of human resources dynamic. How do you retrain people? How do you have people think of technology not as a threat, but as an asset? How do you deal with people who are seeing their jobs change and think of that as an opportunity, not as something to be worried about? And so we really dealt with this in a very holistic way. The woman who oversaw our work in the Philippines, who's worked for us for almost a decade, Julie Peachy, has now moved back to the U.S. And in fact, I just saw her this morning, and she's overseeing our Progress Out of Poverty initiative globally. And I'm sure we'll be using a lot of the lessons from technology for micro savings and taking that kind of poverty measurement and poverty reduction kind of continuous improvement work to a new level.
Great, thanks Alex for elaborating more on microsavings. I think that part of things when we talk about microcredit often gets overlooked. So thanks again for answering questions. Thanks for the question. So we're going to have one more question from Donna in Oregon. We're running out of time, so this is pretty brief. Alex, what are the biggest challenges you think the Grameen Foundation will face in the next few years?
Biggest challenges? Wow, that's a great question. And I just want to also, before I try to answer that, just welcome and just thank all of you who called in from wherever you are, whether you're a donor, a volunteer, or just an interesting person who saw this on Twitter and wanted to call in and check it out. One of the leaders of another microfinance network got the email about this, and her assistant emailed me saying that she regretted she couldn't join. And again, she, like, would probably know a lot of these things as well as I would, but we cast the net broadly. We're glad whoever showed up. My mother said that a couple days ago she was thinking of calling in, wasn't sure what she would ask me. She might embarrass me, so we dodged that bullet, I suppose. But the biggest challenge is, we at Grameen Foundation, with people who thought deeply about poverty reduction, what works best. And I think of people like those at the Gates Foundation, which is very well known, and other foundations which aren't quite as well known. They've developed a strong affinity for us and our team and what we're capable of. And that's why we've gotten some larger grants from them in the last few years than we've ever received in our history. Some grants we've received are bigger than the totality of our budget across all projects as recently as 2002 or 2003. So generating resources to scale proven solutions that we've developed doesn't seem to be a big problem. What I would say the challenge is actually having the discretionary money and to complement our volunteer network and professional staff to actually develop new waves of innovations. That then we can bring to people like the Gates Foundation to help fund the growth and scaling of those over time. And that requires people who, like many of you, who make your contributions, are not pegged to any particular project, but the area of greatest need that we see. And we're very appreciative of that, as all nonprofits are. But again, because we have some strong scaling partners, we feel very good that things that we do, innovations that we do develop alone or with our partners can scale if on the other end of that innovation cycle. And this is why our board has put up a $100,000 matching fund for this month. For all undesignated, unrestricted donations that come in, they'll match them dollar for dollar up to $100,000. So another way of looking at it is, at the earlier point in our history, the discretionary money we had was about a quarter of our annual budget. Right now, it's about 1/7 or 1/8. And so that really puts a premium on a lot of good ideas that we feel we could kind of pilot somewhere in the world. We just don't have the money to do that now. and yet contributors we have, like many of you, allow us to do what we can. So I see that as the biggest challenge. I guess I'll turn it back to Carrie. But Jamie, thank you so much for playing this role, and all of you for asking questions or showing up.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone, for your questions. I know I personally learned a lot. It's just a reminder of the breadth of services that Grameen provides, and also just to get into the details that Alex talked about was really helpful for me as a donor. So thank you, and thank you for everyone for joining. Your questions are really what makes stuff like this really work. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie now. I know we're out of time, and to wrap us up. Thanks.
I'll just scoop my way in here. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Alex, for a great conversation. I always learn something in these as well. And it was fun to look over all the questions that came in, and it's clear we have a passionate bunch joining on this call today from all over the world. So thank you for joining us. Alex did a great job on wrapping up on some of the things we have going on right now. And one of the questions that I saw online was, what can I do now? How can I help? And Alex highlighted our Bankers Without Borders program. This is a skills-based program. You just go to bankerswithoutborders.com and you can register all your skills there, and they can match you with volunteer opportunities. And also, it looks like we have that misspelled on the slide. So bankerswithoutborders.com. And then also, as Alex mentioned right now, our board has put forward a very generous matching challenge. They've actually pooled their funds and said that they will match any donation, dollar for dollar, up to $100,000 between now and December 31st. So we're really excited about that. And if you're considering making a gift of any size, we'd be grateful if you could do it by December 31st. We could get that match and you can get the tax deduction this year. So again, thank you to Jamie, thank you to Alex, and thank you to all of you that took time to join today. Grameen Foundation exists because of supporters like you. We literally could do nothing without our donors and volunteers and supporters. So thank you for the important role you play in this, and we look forward to partnering with you in 2014. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.